Many games in the world affect the gaming community, but there are only some that are truly unique, so inspiring that we have to recognize their creative genius.
My responsibility.
The year is 2004, and Treyarch was just about to open its doors to every single fan craving what they hadn't had before in a video game. That's right, you guessed it. Pizza time! The gaming industry is worth billions of dollars. From shooters to platformers, survival to battle royale, and in hopes to captivating the hearts of the next generation of gamers. Thousands of games are developed every year. Some hit, some miss, some shake the world. Well, okay, maybe not just pizza time, but an open world that lets you helm control of the web-slinger himself, Spider-Man. New York is yours for the taking, and it's your job to protect its citizens, while balancing Peter Parker's life through an amazing story campaign that loosely imitates itself around the second movie from Sam Raimi.
We're slowing down!
God, I miss you, Toby. Creative director Yoshihiro Moriwaki came out of the movie theater after watching Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 in 2002 and knew this is exactly what he wanted the next video game's installment to feel like.
In other ways, the whole thesis of the game is for a player to feel like a superhero, and in specific feel like Spider-Man.
It looks like the movie, and it acts like the movie, and you swear that is the movie, but then we kind of take it a little bit more.
During this time, 3D video game animation is still fairly new as it grew more and more complex every day. However, it's especially a challenging task when it comes to the web-slinger himself, because of his wide variety of abilities. Moriwaki and his team spent countless years perfecting the natural feeling of swinging through New York, as if you were actually there yourself.
He brings so many special powers to the table that no other superhero really even begins to scratch. He can crawl on walls, he's super strong, he swings off of webs, which is really probably the most unique one of all.
So we kind of got something here that we're like, all right, we like how this moves here, we like the feeling of this. Now how can we make this work in the game and give the player the control to pull off these moves whenever they want?
We didn't want the player to go flying through the air and having this neat couple-second moment and then stopping. We wanted to go on and on and on.
One of the most challenging things was to make these moves that are completely unrealistic, that couldn't really be done, make them look natural.
The end result left many in complete awe as their wildest fantasy of becoming Spider-Man came to life. Grand Theft Auto 3's sandbox left a lasting impression on the team, but no other game really had such a unique open-world feel to it. As a bonus, the cinematics left an extra bit of flavor to this saucy, delicious pizza. GTA was open world, but it didn't let you swing around New York. You could, however, still beat up a couple thugs at least. Not only did the game feature a wide variety of voiceover from the original cast, but the CG presentation was pretty high-end for a video game at the time. Spider-Man 1's web-slinging mechanics felt off to a man who will be known as the godfather of programming the web mechanic we love today, Jamie Fristrom. He had come off of porting over Tony Hawk 2, and shortly after his honeymoon came straight to working on Spider-Man 2002. After viewing some of the mechanics the dev team created for this game, Jamie felt it was a little off, and that Spider-Man looked as if he was just flying. He concluded that Neversoft's Spider-Man before that had felt way more like the hero than this version, and locked himself in his office during the night to prototype a new mechanic. Night turned to days and days to weeks, until Jamie finally came out empty-handed and placed things on hold for a while. He stated before that, "Nobody remembers this except me, but I started working on those prototypes before that movie came out. For me, it was more confirmation. It was like, that was what I was trying to get at with those earlier prototypes." The team wanted to fix the swinging because the main complaint around the development was that it looked like a bit off for Spider-Man to be swinging in the air, with his webs connecting to nothing. Toward the end of the development of Spider-Man 2002, Jamie decides to give his prototype another shot. Jamie came in and stated that he worked on something that he believed everyone may enjoy, and soon after, the development team had been sold on the mechanic. However, one problem arises, and that being nearly toward the end of creating Spider-Man 2002, it would be impossible to input this new mechanic in time for the game's release window. The decision was made despite unanimously agreeing Jamie's new prototype was amazing, and it was put on hold for Spider-Man 2 instead. This decision would save a tremendous amount of time for the development team, and thus a lot of money as well. After Spider-Man 1 had finished, the team got to work straight away for Spider-Man 2. Obtaining a prototype that let the user actually experience a full swing motion such as the one Jamie had created left such an impression on many in the development team. The tech was very difficult at the time, and trying to establish boundaries only frustrated playtesters because they wanted to keep swinging. The team had an established vision, but was faced with a difficult task. No matter how many times they tried to resist, they knew the next Spider-Man game needed to be a whole city with no limitations or boundaries. Stopping people mid-swing was just not feasible, and it isn't a lot of fun when you get stopped at a border. Grand Theft Auto 3 had it easier because you, the player, couldn't fly above the buildings, but Spider-Man was a whole other story. Streamlining these buildings in the distance would prove to be difficult. Jamie knew you couldn't just place fog to erase the buildings out in the distance, so instead, a method was created. For Spider-Man 2, 2 levels of detail had been established to help with the game's frame rate. Number 1, buildings would be in a block shape with a slight fuzzy look to it, but as soon as the player got close enough, the building would render in with more detail, which was number 2. This allowed a whole city to be possible to swing around, and there would be no loading whatsoever. Now came time for feedback from the head honchos themselves. Activision. Lucky for the team, feedback from Activision was generally positive because upper management wasn't always looking into what the team had so far. This gave them time to perfect the swinging until the time came that one of the producers walked in, and after an extensive absence to gaze upon the core mechanic that was Spider-Man swinging through New York. He was so impressed that he brought his boss, who brought their boss, and so on and so forth, until the CEO himself of Activision at the time, Ron Dornink, sat down to see how the game was developing. Jamie was very anxious because as he demoed the game, Ron would look intently with no sign of movement until he finished. Ron finally budged to congratulate the team on how awesome the game looked and that they were doing very well. Despite approval from the higher-ups and a pushed-back release date due to the fact that Spider-Man 2 the movie had been delayed, Treyarch began to cut a lot of the game's intended features and missions in order to ship on time. Work that would have taken years was being crammed into half if not a third of the time. An example was an underground sewer system that would have been crawling with encounters, and bosses ultimately got cut due to the time constraint. But that's not all. The team even had to revise how they portrayed Black Cat for the reason that she was deemed too sexy, and much of her animations needed to change. Going back to every animation that Black Cat had just to remove a couple hip swings grew a little tedious. Spider-Man 2's dev team had spoken that the game should be well known for having extensively bad crunch practices, with time totaling around 9 months. The team was always exhausted, and they couldn't really speak up about this kind of thing back then because there were only so many of them, and they were fairly young. Some took to different positions in other projects after Spider-Man 2 and even Spider-Man 3, only to see how badly they were treated during this entire endeavor. Needless to say, bridges were burned and lack of great communication with the higher-ups from Activision and Treyarch both led to the result we saw with Spider-Man 3 the game. Finally, Spider-Man 2 had been released, and the dev team was in waking anticipation on how it would be received. To their delight, Spider-Man 2 the game would become one of the best-selling movie tie-in video games of the year. Yes, there were some critics who disagreed with the game's appraisal from others, but what game doesn't have a few sour grapes toward it?
Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. You are all about to witness the dawning of a new age. The power of a sun is now ours.
This set an example of how a superhero game should be and what a team with love for their project can truly accomplish. Spider-Man 2 the game shook the world.